So excited to have you guys session where we're going to be learning about some innovative computational thinking in elementary classrooms that's going on right here in New York City. Great. We are receiving feedback. Oh, okay. Shout out. 38 years. Yo, can we give them a round of applause for a good 38? All right. All right. That's beautiful. We got Mary from Somerset, Library Director, Community College, also adjunct professor in history. So welcome, Mary. Francis, what's happening from Queens, currently in Michigan. STEM lover and facilitator. Shout out to all the STEM lovers. STEM lovers in the building. Give it up for some computer love. All right. In the midst of the COVID-19 crisis, New York City has been thrust into the epicenter of a global pandemic. And its young people and educators have been catapulted into the world of remote learning overnight. In the face of this, New York City has continued to be at the vanguard of integrating computational thinking into elementary classrooms, thanks to deep investment and robust partnerships that bring together the New York City Department of Education and its CS for All initiative. Innovative organizations such as Cornell Tech and Project Tomorrow, the Robin Hood Learning and Technology Fund, shout out Robin Hood, and their research partners. So we're excited to hear from today local schools and partners to hear about how they're adapting to COVID-19, to experience firsthand, like right here in the session, in the chat. So I need people to be nice and active in the chat to hear some remote activities that encourage computational thinking. We're also going to have a discussion about how computational thinking can be leveraged to support student learning in this new and completely transformed educational landscape. So let's give it up and give some love for our moderator, Steve Azeka, the program officer at the Robin Hood Learning and Technology Fund. We also have Diane Levitt, the Senior Director of K-12 Education at at Cornell Tech. We have Julie Evans, the CEO at Project Tomorrow, and Lionel Bergeron, the Director of Elementary School Computer Science Academics at the New York City Department of Education. We are super excited for this panel. Get ready for some firsthand activities. I've seen them already. They're so much fun. Let's jump into it.
Great. Thank you, Jamel. Really appreciate it. Just quick, once again, Steven Azeka, part of the Robin Hood Learning and Technology Fund, the Computational Thinking Program Officer. And I just want to start off by thanking all the people at STC for making this possible. It's been such an amazing conference thus far. And big shout out, Jamel, to your session yesterday that really set us up perfectly as far as thinking about equity within education. And in this session today, we'll be able to really see what a lot of those things look like. Just to give you some quick context, that just like many of you guys that are in the chat, that a lot of this work predates COVID-19. That for us, the Robin Hood Learning and Technology Fund, that we started this work in 2018 when we started funding a range of different organizations. We see universities here, we have DOE that we partnered with, we have nonprofits that we worked with, schools, districts, researchers, all of these different people to come together to be able to really, as Jamel said, integrate computational thinking inside the classroom in core areas, especially in elementary schools, where we're looking at how we can integrate it within things like not just the STEM areas traditionally thought, like science and math, but also in ELA and social studies. And also trying to figure out how arts and everything else comes into it. And, as Jamel said, that, even though our work predates it, that we came into COVID-19 continuing to innovate, and so excited to have all the people on the panel today be able to share not only what they've been doing, but also what they see forward and what the role of computational thinking looks in the future. So not just looking now, but looking out in the future, as I mentioned. So with that being said, I want to start off with one of our first questions. Probably one of the hardest things to do, which is what is computational thinking? Like, everyone seems to have a different, potentially different perspective, but it'd be good to hear from all of our panelists how they define computational thinking and also how they define integration of computational thinking. So Diane, do you want to kick us off?
Sure, Steve. So I define computational thinking as the way we prepare problems to be solved by a computer. That doesn't mean they can only be solved by a computer, but the strategies we use, algorithmic thinking, decomposition, evaluation, logic, and pattern recognition, are those used by computer scientists. At PS 86, a very large elementary school in the Bronx that we work at through our funding with Robinhood, we've had 2 years of successful CT integration into English language arts and math. And we found that among the most powerful outcomes of this work was actually the student focus on metacognition. Even students as young as kindergartners started to look at and talk about their own thinking. One school superintendent we shared our work with said to us, for 10 years, we've been telling kids to be problem solvers, but we never gave them a vocabulary. During the current crisis, we've worked with students to integrate computational thinking into design thinking as well, to give students a creative outlet. And now that we've really built the understanding of CT with students, we're building it, tying it back to computer science in some interesting ways. For instance, we're currently presenting a series of workshops to elementary school and middle school students on pixels and how digital images are encoded and stored. Based on their understanding of decomposition and abstraction, we're going to introduce the concept of data storage, of tokens, and of binary and hexadecimal systems. So pretty ambitious stuff that we're able to do because of this foundation.
Diane. Julie, do you want to take it?
Sure. So nice to be here, folks. Thank you so much. So in our work, and we're currently working in 9 schools in New York City in several different boroughs with 4th grade teachers exclusively, we talk about computational thinking as a set of strategies for solving complex problems. We also look at it very strongly through an equity lens that all students need to have this type of a new literacy, a literacy around computational thinking skills, concepts, and practices to be well prepared for the future. So that, of course, means to get to that all students, we have to be working with all teachers. And so our focus has been on teacher readiness to infuse computational thinking concepts within their instructional practice DNA so that it is part of everyday curriculum, seamlessly integrated into what teachers are doing. Our work is around preparing teachers to feel that level of comfort with the CT concepts, also to have the confidence to implement the practices within their curriculum, as well as having the competency around the skills and what the practices look like. So we really think about this from a very much an interwoven standpoint within, as I like to say, the DNA of their instructional practices.
Great, thank you. Well, for the Computer Science for All initiative, I think that computational thinking is really embedded into the framework that we use. It's called the Blueprint, which highlights perspective, practices, and concepts specific to computer science. But you know, a lot of what Diane and Julie shared are built into that. But we also take the approach that it's not just about problem solving, but it's an opportunity for students to express themselves and be innovative and start thinking about the impacts of what they create in computer science on society, their community, and even just like as small as their classroom. So.
Guys for sharing. You know, it's great to be able to hear this coalition that this is computational thinking is not this peripheral thing that is an appendice to the education, that, you know, through all the definitions that you've heard, that it's something that's integrated within the learning. And like what Diane was saying, with the metacognitive skills, play such a crucial role in how not only that students learn, but also how teachers teach, which is great to hear. So knowing that, you know, all you explained some of the work that you guys have done prior and the schools that you work with. Now looking forward, or in the current present time rather, amongst the sort of COVID-19 environment, what are some of the challenges that you guys have really seen? It'd be good to hear from all of your perspectives. Julie, do you want to take a first stab at this?
Sure, happy to, Steve. So we had only just started our program in January of this year. So we were brand new into working with our teachers. Our focus has been on, as I mentioned before, the readiness of teachers. So we assess teachers on their where they are in the process of infusing computational thinking. So obviously the school closure environment created several new opportunities. We'll look at it that way, both to think about computational thinking, not only from a plugged standpoint or something that was using technology, but also where there were students that did not have technology at home. How could we continue the computational thinking work that we were doing with teachers, even when students did not have technology at home? So more from what is referred to as an unplugged environment. So looking at it, particularly again from that equity access, to be able to provide support to the teachers, both to elevate their skills and then also to give them opportunities to really engage with the students, we create a series of side-by-side lesson plans for teachers that they could use, that were both plugged and unplugged, that address the same core concepts. Our goal with all of this for this year was to make sure that our teachers felt comfortable with the concepts and they could see how it supported their everyday curriculum. So to be able to give those sort of options, particularly in ELA and math, was really instrumental in helping teachers start that process of developing that confidence, able to implement computational thinking, but meeting them where they were. So rather than assuming that we can jump 4 steps down the road and give them things that were either too sophisticated or would not work in the environment that they were facing, was a critical part of this. We have kept, obviously, throughout this entire process in terms of providing mentoring and coaching to our teachers in our project. And we continue to see where some of the students, even despite the best efforts that have been made to get them connected, are still not online. And so that work, that foundational work that we are laying the table for in terms of supporting both plugged and unplugged activity is definitely a critical component of our work right now.
Thank you. Feel free to jump in, whoever wants to respond next.
Sure, I can go. I definitely think that the points that Julie is making, apply to especially computer science instruction. I also think it highlights some of the, deficiency in like our digital literacy and our digital fluency skills that we should be teaching in the school, because I think some of that access isn't just about like the hardware, but it's also like how to really navigate the hardware outside of their personal interests. And, students are always good at like doing what they know how to do. But how do we start teaching them those like digital fluency skills that can inform their learning through like a remote learning environment? I also think that it also highlights the importance and the value of teaching computational thinking and computer science, because the skills that they can learn through CT and CS can then be applied to, okay, now I have this new application or this new device in front of me. How do I utilize that in a way that, works with the expectations of the teachers? I think especially in elementary school, we always highlight the unplugged activities And I think that like trying to demonstrate how computer science can be taught without a computer is a really valuable tool. And I think, like Julie says, it is an opportunity. It's start to like think innovatively about how we teach, and then that applies to, you know, I think one of the important things is I think with that initial response was that teachers immediately wanted to like teach their classroom just but online. So how do we start doing it differently? But not only doing it differently because we also don't want to create and develop things for now, and then once we're back in the classroom, they're dismissed. So like, how do we bring what we learned in this experience into the classroom? I think one of the biggest challenge for like computer science education is that it's such a collaborative experience between the teacher and the students and their peers. How do you like bring that collaboration within a remote learning environment? I know, like, you know, I present mostly to teachers, and so when we have in-person professional development, it's very like hands-on and people talking to each other and sharing their experiences, and collaborative. So I think that's one of the biggest challenges, because, you know, there's a lot of aspects where students can feel empowered through that collaboration. So like, you know, how do we do that in a remote learning environment?
Yeah, thank you for sharing those. You know, just the access is such a huge thing, and thinking creatively, like both of your guys' examples around unplugged and plugged versions, so with and without technology, of how you can still do the similar work. I just wanted to quickly touch base and see, Diane too, some additional points. You're muted, Diane, right now. Muted, Diane.
Okay, technology, we're good with that. One of the things we learned from our work coaching teachers in CT is what a powerful CS on-ramp computational thinking is for every teacher. And I think Lionel and Julie have mentioned that as well. We think it's an incredible tool for driving equity for that reason, but equitable access to high quality education is our biggest challenge now, I think, hands down. And taking many forms, right? Instruction, content, Wi-Fi, devices. But the bottom line is that the crisis has widened some educational disparities. I'm already on the record talking about laptops and Wi-Fi, so I won't go down that road again. But you know, our students have challenges. In New York City, our apartments are really small and expensive, and kids have trouble finding places to work quietly. I think our platform challenge has been really big. First, losing Zoom, and you know, I think that has impaired the quality of synchronous teaching. Although I know Google is working really hard to get Meet to make Meet a better tool. From the teaching side, you know, I don't feel like I knew enough about how to maximize digital instruction to have the impact that all this effort should yield. So I'll say that I wish as an educator that I'd spent more time before this crisis learning from our colleagues in blended learning and homeschooling, because they have a lot to teach us now. So those are some of the challenges we see. I think it's actually also really hard to teach computer science in the browser when your kids are in the browser with you. We haven't actually mastered that yet, although we're going to talk to Tampika on Tuesday about how to do that with Scratch.
That's great. So knowing that there's yeah, go ahead, Lionel, sorry.
Just one thing, because I saw something in the chat that David had wrote about trying to start his lessons off as like the positive feedback initially, just like, how are you doing? Checking in with the students. Yeah. Because when thinking through this, like, I think one of the challenges is that, you know, if you think of like hierarchy of needs, like the current circumstances has reduced like everybody to those first, like, you know, just what are my primary needs, and then like safety. And so then how do we give them that feeling of safety to start feeling like they belong in a remote learning environment? And I think it has to do with teachers too, because teachers, you know, they're working really hard at this, but they're going through the same thing our students are going through, and trying to then support the students. So I think that was a really good point, that like also addressing like the needs of the students is
and
really
let's
important.
just shout out to teachers who are also parents. I just didn't even know, or who are caregivers for elderly members of their family, or like this job, super hard. So
Yeah, absolutely. So building on what you're saying, Lionel, so knowing that there's these different challenges, what are some ways that you and collectively as a whole for us, have you guys addressed some of these challenges?
So I think part of it is just like, you know, one of the first things that we try to do in our office was ask the teachers to like, what do you need? Like, what are your expectations? And then what are your students telling you that they need? And what are the challenges that you're facing? And then also before giving them like what we believe to be a solution, like, well, what do you think is the solution? Or like, how do you think you could help the students? And a lot of the times the teachers have the ideas, they just don't know how to like, you know, like fulfill the need, you know, like I want to do this, but I'm not sure how to do it. And like, I want the students to start using like, you know, video content, or like, how can I get students to, if they're designing something, how do I get them to share their designs? And so then talking through the tools that they have available to them, what are some strategies that they can then use? I also think, you know, people in our office who work on the equity team, you know, they reevaluated the CRSE framework provided by the state, looking at how that applies to this remote learning environment. I think it's the same for, you know, other practices like UDL. But again, doing it in a way that's like going to be effective, you know, once we go back into the classroom, because even if we talk about the fall, it might be like what Diane was similar to saying, like blended learning, like it might be both remote and in person. So like, how do we start transitioning to that? So I think that's one of the really key factors, just like rethinking what we have done for the remote environment, but really listening to the teachers and students' needs.
yeah, I'll jump in and just say that I think, you know, Lionel's point that we've got to sort of start where teachers are is definitely something we have also really felt. And I do want to say we've been really lucky as a community that we're so connected to one another, and that people have used those virtual tools to share ideas and information. We also tried to get a grasp of where kids and families were, and to try to meet them there. And for us, that's a little bit unusual because our work was mostly in coaching. But on the parent side, you know, I tweet out the CT inspired activities every day on Breakfast CS. But also, we've been doing this series of workshops for our partner schools, more direct computational thinking and CS instruction. Over the past 2 months, we've learned a bunch of things. So one is that we've figured out that one way to address these challenges is to make the synchronous learning as interactive as we possibly can. So we only talk for a couple of minutes at a time, and then we're going to toss it back to kids either with something for them to do or a question to answer. And that back and forth seems to keep kids engaged. Otherwise, you can like watch them zone out before your very eyes. We're really mindful of the constraints of what materials are available to students. So we're creating workshops that don't require students to print anything, for instance. And if we need supplies at home, we try to keep it to a bare minimum: paper, something to write with, sometimes common recycled materials. We've been doing a maker series on building mechanisms with third graders. And after 4 weeks of workshops, today my team is actually mailing some materials, straws, yarn, rubber bands, home for the final workshop in the series, just to make sure everyone has what they need. We are repeating ourselves a lot more when we teach online now. We really feel like we need to do that just to keep the wagon circled. And then I would say we always have a defined learning goal, but we really try to make it fun for kids. We always say that we're trying to get to the intersection of rigor and joy. But right now, I would say rigor is the side street and joy is the highway.
Wonderful.
That's nice, Diane. I like that. I like that rigor and joy. So, in addition to the work that we've been doing with teachers, obviously continuing our mentoring and coaching with teachers, the other thing that we started with school closures was doing just a weekly meeting for all of the teachers in our cohort across the 9 schools, and also a weekly meeting for all of the school administrators across our 9 schools. Part of our sustainability plan in terms of thinking again about getting computational thinking and these new learning models infused into the DNA of the school process was to build community. And so what a wonderful opportunity to take advantage of this during this unpleasant time is to help build some community. And what has been really interesting is that the teachers are starting to rely upon each other across the cohort, not just within their own school, and seeing that they have some shared challenges and they have some new opportunities. Same thing with the administrators. And what's come out of that is that quite often the teachers are looking for resources that are beyond what we had laid out as part of our CT plan. So for example, we're providing teachers with some resources that we have about trauma-informed instruction, because that came up in one of our conversations. So thinking about what that means in terms of what's happening in children's lives and what's going forward. From our administrators, that we started a really interesting conversation around blended learning in the fall, and realized that they were not as familiar with blended learning as some other teachers are. And so we're going to be running a blended learning book study for our administrators here over the next couple of weeks to be able to help them at least get some basic knowledge about that. So being very responsive is what I think has really been the primary component of our work, is understanding what the impact has been on teachers and administrators and being responsive to what their needs are, whether those are within the sandbox of CT or outside of the sandbox of CT.
Wonderful. Thank you guys for all sharing. So what we'll do next is, what better way to actually see how this actually looks than actually experience it firsthand. And what we'll do is we'll have each of our panelists be able to lead a lesson and describe a little bit of some of the activities that they do with students and teachers. So we're going to start off with Diane leading an activity that integrates within mathematics, then Julie with an ELA, and then Lionel will have one focused on just around social emotional learning. So with that being said, one other thing I'll mention too, within the window, you'll see our presentation. If you wanted to have it maximized, just double click it twice. And I'll hand it over to you, Diane. Thank you.
Thanks, Steve. Okay, so I'm going to run you through the first workshop that we created that we call in our CS at Home series, that we started to present to students to sort of start to lay a foundation for more of the CT work we would be doing together. And I'm just going to glide right through it. So you can go ahead and there you go. So we started up, back, Jamel. Thank you. So we started with kids where they were, right? We talked about an algorithm as a series of steps, like the steps that they were currently taking to wash their hands. So we're trying to keep the current situation present, but not offensive or not oppressive. So that was an algorithm everyone could understand. We used it as the moment to reinforce that message that everyone should be washing their hands. And then we, go ahead, Jamel, we went in and talked about, and Jamel, this slide has some animation, so click away. We talked about how we take something apart, we decompose it in order to create an algorithm. And this was creating an algorithm to draw a smiley face. We talked about the amount of detail we give is really important to getting the outcome. Go ahead to the next slide, thank you. Then we tried creating, click away, Jamel, thanks. We tried creating a familiar object for students. We gave them this set of directions. And if you go to the next slide, you'll see that what they created at home was, yeah, sorry for all this animation. I didn't think it was all gonna come up, but we created a traffic light, traffic signal. And we use this as a way to talk about how we can use directions, very clear, explicit directions to create an algorithm. So then we go on, we talked about creating these silly creatures. You can go ahead, Jamel. We showed them how we decompose these creatures into a series of shapes and lines, keep going, and use that then to draw a creature that we call Zoomy. And Zoomy has become kind of our mascot for all of our lessons. And if you keep going, we showed them how we take Zoomy apart into an algorithm. We decompose Zoomy into these pieces in order to give them instructions on how to draw it. You can keep going. And then we take that moment to talk about what is decomposition. And usually we use this as a check-in point, right? Does everybody with us? What else, what other computational thinking skills were you using when we did this? And then we move on and we give them instructions without having shown them the image. So that's Helix, and there we go. And so now we're giving the algorithm and they're drawing it at home. And when they're done, they're going to hold that up and show it to us. And you'll see a couple of what those pictures look like. There we go. That kids have drawn at home based on the algorithm. We do some reflection. What did we learn? What were we using in terms of computational thinking? We hear some really interesting comments from kids back, and then they create an algorithm for their own silly creature. They've drawn one and they create it. We will focus on, size and shape and location and numbers, trying to help them think about how to build detail into the algorithm that will make it easier for somebody to replicate what they've drawn. And then we have kids read out the algorithm that they've done and other students draw it in the room. And that is really fun. We pick 2 or 3 kids to do that. They have a great time at it. We definitely see that moment where some kids really want to get it right. And we try to really ease that stress for students. We talk a lot about debugging at this moment and how much fun it is to debug, and how that's our favorite thing about computer science is nothing is ever wrong. It's just something we get to fix. Anyway, and then at the end, we have a long conversation with students about computational thinking, reviewing the concepts that we've used and trying to circle them back around, and sometimes to lay the foundation for what we're gonna do next. And I wanna shout out to my colleague Liz, who I am pretty sure is here. I think I saw her in the chat, who was one of the people who helped create the Silly Creatures workshop, and it's been super successful for us. And Steve, you actually saw it, so maybe you can weigh in.
Yeah, no, it's amazing being able to see students be able to engage directly at a distance in a way that still gives them the freedom to create something that's individualized, that this is not all their creatures are not going to look exactly the same, but then trying to reflect, oh, this is what I did, this is what I did correctly, or not even correctly. Here's one way that I can interpret, right, the instructions and other ways. Yeah. Perfect, thank you.
So, many thanks to Liz Mello for letting me do this and throw it up here today. So
thank you.
I want to say that it took us about 10 days to create this 45 minutes of content that teachers are having to do every single day. Don't know exactly how they're doing that.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Diane. Julie and Jamel, you can go ahead and advance the slides.
Hi, folks. So we are going to be looking at an ELA lesson and thinking about, again, that infusion, that interweaving of computational thinking concepts within your ELA lesson. So when was the last time someone thought about the Aesop's fable, the tortoise and the hare? Go ahead and put some sort of agreement in the chat box if you've thought about the tortoise and the hare lately. Go ahead, Jamal. We'll go on to the next slide. What we're going to do is we're going to give a modeling for you in terms of how to infuse computational thinking within everyday curriculum. Remember, our thought, or our approach to this is very much to look at integrating computational thinking within what teachers are already doing, and so taking advantage of that. Go ahead, Jamal. So from a standpoint of a typical lesson within a fourth grade classroom, these are the type of things that teachers might have in mind when they're looking to teach about theme. So how do we determine the theme or themes within the fable of the tortoise and the hare? They would have the students read the fable. We have provided access for all of our project schools to Brain Pop's set of multiple different solutions and different opportunities for students to infuse computational thinking within their everyday curriculum. And so there's a Brain Pop movie about story themes, so the students may watch that. Then we're going to have an opportunity, and we're going to walk through this together, to think about the traits of the tortoise and the hare, to think about the plot, to see the relationship between those, and then also to start thinking about what those themes are. And I see already in our chat some of the themes are coming up. Go ahead, Jamal. So in this way, when we think about the traits or characteristics of tortoise and hare, we'll actually be exhibiting some pattern recognition, a key component of computational thinking. When we look at the plot component, we'll be doing some decomposing, and then we'll be actually getting involved in abstraction when we start to think about the relationships and the connection between the traits and the plot. Go ahead, Jamal. So for the activity, and we're going to use the chat box for this, folks, we're going to have 3 teams. So if your first name begins with A through H, you're on team tortoise. If your first name begins with an I to Q, you're on team hare. And then you're on team race if your first name is at the lower third of the alphabet from R to Z. So go ahead, if you're on team tortoise, put forth what you think one personal quality or characteristic is that defines tortoise as a character in the story. Do the same if you're on team hare, but your focus is on hare. And then if you're on the race, what are some of the steps in the race itself? And so I see some great answers coming up here. Go ahead, Jamal, go on to the next. So when we start thinking about the characteristics or traits of tortoise and hare, a nice way to start organizing the content is to use a concept map. Now this again very much supports what teachers are doing right now, because quite a few teachers use concept maps as a way to help students generate ideas, organize their ideas, think about the relationships. So we see here a number of different traits, many of which have come up in the chat. Thank you to all 3 of our teams. And what we actually are doing in this process is starting pattern recognition as a computational thinking concept. We're looking for the relationships and the resulting data and use that to help with our problem solving going forward. Go ahead, Jamal. Now, in the same way, when we start looking at the steps in the process, we see that that is actually an experience or opportunity to exhibit decomposition. So we start thinking about what all those different steps are and putting that complex problem into a series of parts. And so that's a good way to do that. And we can do all of this within a concept map. Go ahead, Jamal, to the next. And then finally, from abstraction, another computational thinking component, the teacher can have conversations with the students about how do we eliminate the fluff of the data? What is most important in our data versus the things that we don't need to focus on and maybe actually distracting to us. This is actually a very good opportunity to actually bring into the conversation what students' current lives are in a remote learning environment as well, to think about the things that might be distracting to them. So again, we start to connect the dots between the traits and the plot to start our work in identifying the theme. Go ahead, Jamal. So for example, when we start to look at some of these connections, we may see, for example, that Tortoise, one of his qualities is determination. And thus, within the plot, we see that exhibited in his persistence, his steadiness in going ahead with the race, even though the hare at one point has taken a nap and has played in the grass. And so in the same way, we see maybe the hare's overconfidence in his ability to win the race based on his physical talents may have caused him to, again, as I said, take that nap. And so we see that having a relationship then into the plot itself. So we use those components to start a conversation with the students about identifying the themes. Go ahead, Jamal. So several of you put in what some of those themes might be. Slow and steady wins the race. Persistence and determination are keys to success. And hard work beats talent when talent doesn't work hard. But the key component here is that we have infused within a standard instructional practice that teachers have, looking at themes within the narrative story, building a concept map, helping students with self-discovery of some of this information, to really be able to infuse into their conversation the vocabulary around computational thinking and starting to exercise those muscles of computational thinking so that it becomes commonplace in their way of attacking different types of problems or their ways of thinking about demonstrating what they know to their teachers. And so we think this is a really effective way, not only to help students with the computational thinking process, but to help the teachers build competency, comfort, and confidence because it is infused within the practices that they normally use. Go ahead, Jamal. I'm always happy to share additional information about the way that we are approaching this with our teachers. And so I provided my contact information here too. Congratulations to Team Tortoise, Team Hare, you did a good job. Congratulations for everyone that was involved with the race. Back to you, Steve.
Thank you so much, Julie. It's great to be able to see how all of this work can exist, not only in STEM, but then outside in these ELA questions. In ELA areas too, so great to be able to see in action. Last but not least, we'll have Lionel be able to round this.
Okay, great, thank you. So what we're going to look at today is just kind of an overview of a social emotional learning unit that we're looking at as an opportunity for teachers to integrate computer science into other subject areas. This is a big ask for elementary school teachers because they don't necessarily have the time for adding a new content area. So like, how can computer science be integrated into what they might already be teaching? And we saw as an opportunity this year because New York City Department of Education launched a new initiative around social emotional learning and highlighting some of the curriculum that teachers can use in the classroom. And so this kind of works into that. So you can go ahead to the next slide. So initially, the idea came out of an activity that was developed in conjunction with the SEP Junior program. We work with a group called Sunset Spark, Galen and Yadira, on activities for elementary school around computer science. And one of them that they came up with about a year or two ago was called Coding with Feeling. And the idea behind it was that students would be asked to program a robot, whether Dash, robot, or Sphero, to express a particular emotion. So go ahead to the next slide. So we thought about, well, how can we expand this out? So one of the things as part of integration for computer science that we realized is a really great opportunity is to begin lessons or begin units with some kind of media that students are familiar with already, that can kind of ground the work that they're doing. So, here's an example, maybe beginning this social emotional learning unit by reading a book or showing a video clip that relates to expressing feelings. So this is the pout fish. So go ahead to the next one. And so, of course, they can use books, they can use pictures or videos to the topic of feelings. It also offers the point of reference for future activities. So teachers can go back and be like, well, remember when we read this, or remember when you heard this. It's just a good way to ground that work. And then it also offers an opportunity for content integration, kind of similar to what Julie was talking about, like, you know, there's elements of reading comprehension, or if we're talking about feelings, we can also then talk about perspective of a character in a book. So next slide. So what we started to do is looking at some of the activities that are built into those social emotional learning units. One of them is identifying and sorting feelings. And then as we were doing it, we also wanted to think about, like, how can we take those activities and give it a little bit more context for the students on, you know, where they are and, like, you know, how they might communicate. Emojis is a big one in computer science because emojis can be a demonstration of, like, using your own language. It's something that a lot of our students are familiar with and use to express themselves, you know, especially communicating with each other. And I think this also plays a lot into the idea of remote learning, is that, you know, we think that it's hard to get information from our students through a remote learning environment. However, they communicate a lot through digital tools, so, like, recognizing how those might fit in. Go ahead to the next slide. So what we started to do is looking at a sorting feelings activity, you know, often used in social emotional learning. It also can connect to computer science and computational thinking. And this kind of ties back into Diane's activity in the beginning about, you know, looking at that smiley face and breaking it down. How can we decompose the different emojis of the representations of feelings, and then start recognizing patterns and evaluating them, you know, because if we're asking them to think about a picture and, like, what feeling does that represent, it builds in those CS and CT practices. So go ahead to the next slide. And from there, as we ask students to kind of, like, break down that idea of, like, what represents, like, what patterns do we see, we can also do that in other things of, like, you know, exploring what are some of the causes of feelings. So, like, you know, what certain things cause happiness, what certain things cause you to feel sad. And I also think this is something that came up in the work that we've been doing for remote learning, is that we're often kind of, like, you know, prompted to, like, ask the students, how are you feeling right now? How is it going? You know, because they're at home, because they're dealing with, you know, the pressure and the, you know, the stress of this remote learning and things around COVID, that they might not necessarily want to express it to them, of how they're feeling. So talking about empathy, I think, is also a great opportunity. Like, you can get students to prompt it by asking, like, well, how do you think essential workers are feeling right now? How do you think your siblings are feeling? And this kind of builds into this social emotional learning. Go to the next one. And this is just kind of an idea. You don't have to show the video, but I think there's a lot of really great opportunities for expressing feelings, you know, whether it's through Common Sense Media or Sesame Street or PBS, or even just things that students are already familiar with, like the movie Inside Out. There's a lot of really great representation of expressing your feelings. And this kind of, again, builds that foundation. So go to the next one. So then what we ask students to do is, okay, now that we've talked a little bit about feelings, how would you express a feeling, but using computer science? And one of the things that we're trying to do is take that universal design for learning approach. We ask students to first, you can go to the next slide. Just if you have a question, that first, nope, go back. Yep, right there. The previous slide with the little blue character, his name's Glitch. He's from CodeSpark, which has actually started building in some of the facial expressions into the programming language, which is a really great addition for students to kind of, like, use that as part of their project. Thank you for going back, Jamal. Go ahead to the next one. So the universal design approach is that, you know, students choose what feeling they want to express, and then students can choose what platform they want to use to express it. Sometimes this can cause a little anxiety for teachers because, you know, students might be all over the place. So you can definitely confine, you know, to, like, an online platform, or if they wanted to use, like, one of the classroom robots. But what we really want students to be able to do is kind of, like, lead the work themselves And then from that, once they choose a platform, you help students then start to think about, okay, well, if you wanted to jump up and down, what do you think you need to do within a computer programming environment to make the character jump up and down? Or like, if you look at the robots, are the robots able to jump up and down? And it's really them guiding that work. Okay, go ahead to the next slide. And from there, after they create a project that relates to, expressing an emotion, then we can move on towards having students explore what are the regulating strategies that we're using, which can be really valuable, especially in this time of remote learning. This is a good example. Go Noodle has a lot of great things. You can go to the next slide. But from that exploration of, regulating, they can then choose to create a strategy themselves. But then again, either using the same tool or a new tool to demonstrate that strategy. So here's a couple of Scratch examples, like, a simple, like, can you guess who is mad? And it might help their classmates teach recognizing feelings in other people and empathizing with other people. And then, or maybe count to 10. When I was a middle school teacher, one of my students, his biggest strategy was like, Mr. B, I need to count to 10. And so like this one will be just a simple sprite character counting 1, 2, 3 through 10 with them and kind of pacing it and giving them the opportunity to build that activity themselves. And like, it not only gives them the opportunity to build something that expresses their idea, but it also drives the learning around computer science. Like, what do I need to like count to 10? Do I need to pace it out and then explore new ways? And that's where the teacher steps in and kind of helps the instruction. Okay, you can go to the next slide. And so, again, it's the universal design for learning approach. Students choose a strategy they want to demonstrate, and then they choose how they want to demonstrate it, and then teacher supports the CS content learning. And of course, you keep it within the context of, this is also that opportunity where if a student's like, well, I would like my sprite to disappear and then come back after a certain amount of time. If the teacher doesn't know, it's like, oh, I'm not sure how to do that, let's see if we can figure it out together, which I think offers a lot of great opportunities. Okay, so go ahead to the next slide. So we're going to do a quick little, as I mentioned before, the sorting activity. This is an example activity from the unit that we've been working on. So go ahead to the next slide. So the initial part of the activity, and this would be done in the classroom, you would split the students up into small groups or pairs, and you would ask them to sort the faces into 3 different groups. And that's all you would really get, just make sure you use all the faces and put them into 3 different groups, and then be ready to describe how you came up with your 3 groups. Now, of course, this is much harder in a remote learning environment. So go ahead to the next slide. So you might have to provide students with a different reference point for selecting an image. So we're going to try this out right now. You don't have to create 3 groups, but come up with 1 group and choose which faces represent that particular group. Just put the numbers in, in the chat box. So you might say 1, 7, and 12 are in a group, and then explain why you think they would all be in a group. So go take 2 seconds, to look at some of the images and pick the numbers and just explain why you might put them all in a group. 1
more minute, Lionel.
Oh, okay. All right. So we're a little short on time, so we're going to just skip through that. But you might say something like, 1, 12, and 7 all have a smiley face. Good, Diane. Thank you. 2, 3, and 6, they look confused. Great. So go ahead to the next slide. You can also create this in a way that allows for using digital tools to like annotate an image or a document. So go ahead to the next slide. Yeah, all feeling really funky, right? Yes, exactly. Thank you. Okay, next slide. And so, don't stay here for a second. And so then in the same small groups, you could ask students to talk about vocabulary words in 3 different groups. Can they then match the vocabulary words or the feelings words with particular images? So it's just a sorting activity, but you're breaking it down into different parts. And the sorting is a big task often in computer science. Okay, and then the next one. Next slide. Yep. And so it's also important to, with elements of CRSE integration. So again, as I mentioned in the front, you might not use those typical drawing faces. Maybe I can start using emojis as a representation of feelings. Next one. And along the same lines of the CRSE, also making it available in other languages. So not just using English, but maybe Spanish feelings words. Okay, and then the next one. And then the final part of this project would be, go ahead to the next slide, is create your own. And you can think about a different emotion. And then you can also use platforms, like this is just a Google slide where students could drag the images and stack them on top of each other to create happy, or go to the next slide. A really great partner, Hello Ruby, has this activity for emoji time, which dives a little bit deeper in it, and students can create their own emoji masks and sentences and express ideas through emojis. And I think that's the last slide. Yep, that's it.
Perfect. You could actually move to the next slide, Jamel. Thank you. So I think we have enough time for a couple of questions. First off, thank you so much for each of you for presenting all of the wonderful ideas and seeing how this actually looks like in reality, right, in actual practice. So it's great to see it. So that being said, feel free to use the right side of the screen and start filling up the questions. And while we're waiting for these to be populated, one question I had, looking through all these different lessons, we talk so much about equity within the terms of access. I'm also wondering, thinking about some of our students, as far as those L students, those ones that have learning differences. What are some things that you guys have done to really target these populations to be able to support them in this environment?
Well, I'll say that I think we do leverage UDL quite a bit, even now that we're teaching online. But we want to think about the most explicit scaffolding you can with each of these ideas. And in each moment, be thinking about how many different ways can we present this idea and engage students so that we hit everyone's comfortable learning mode. I also think for us, the use of explicit CT terms has been an equity strategy. So whereas I think in years past, sometimes we expect students to divine that information for themselves, we really try to name it. And I think that is an equity strategy.
I think it's very much around, teachers are familiar with differentiating instruction. And so being able to bring it home for them that this work includes new opportunities for them to differentiate instruction for students based on what their needs are is not only a key point of addressing those learning differences of the special needs of students, but also really underscoring the equity component of this, that this needs to be something that is developed within all students. As I mentioned before, CT as a literacy should not be something that is only for students that are interested in particular things or only students that have certain proficiencies, but really needs to be as important as any of the other literacies that we're talking about. So we support that through understanding by bringing it home for the teachers around differentiated instruction.
For again, I think a lot of the things we've hit a lot of the points is just providing the different opportunities for the students. Like this past month, we've been inviting the STEP juniors to work on maker projects and around something called craft computing. And it's really just like making things with their hands, but then, like work with what you have. And, we had talked, Diane had mentioned like, well, if, think about what the students have access to. And it even made me think about like, what if students don't have access to scissors, or, working with a first grader, teachers don't want their students working with scissors without any guidance. So even thinking about like, how can I share practices for like tearing paper or like folding paper and those types of activities to engage them. I also think it's an opportunity for teachers to rethink how they use the digital tools that they have access to. that they might not necessarily think of using in the classroom. So one of the things, you know, the DOE here is provided iPads to multiple students who don't have access to devices through their schools. So some of the teachers like, well, they don't have keyboards, but the iOS, the operating system for Apple, has voice to text. So, and that's not just for students that can't type. It could be for bilingual students. It could be for just, you know, I used to work with students that just couldn't get their thoughts out of their head fast enough, but for typing, but they could definitely say it. They definitely express it that way. We're really starting to think about how we can integrate those tools into the work that we're doing through this remote learning. So yeah.
That's great. One other question that we've had, and we have time for probably one person to answer this. So what are some questions that still remain that you're looking to solve? Who wants to take a stab at that one?
Well, I always have tons of questions. So what we're trying to find in our work is not only how do we move teachers to having greater comfort and confidence in their CT skills, but then how do we transfer that? How does that then go from teacher to teacher? So how do we take that concept of community and get teachers supporting each other in different ways? And it doesn't need to just be the high-flying mentor teacher, hero teacher. Everyone has something to share. If we take this from an experiential learning standpoint, that experience that all the teachers are going through, that the students are going through right now, is stuff that's really important for us to capture and be able to leverage as an asset.
Wonderful.
So that's what I'm thinking about.
Wonderful. This is such a great, I think, beginning for a lot of us too, of coming together and sharing these resources and continuing it. Jamel, if you turn on to the next slide. So big thanks to everyone for being able to attend. I have everyone's contact information here. So if you want to be able to reach out to them, feel free to contact them. I also have the link for the presentation today. So hopefully if you found a resource that was helpful within the presentation, you'll be able to access it there. So I wish everyone, thanks again to everyone for being able to attend. Thanks for our panelists for being able to speak. Thank you, STC, for hosting us. And I hope everyone's well and stays healthy. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
All right, let's give it up for our panel.